Morning, everyone. This is Jean Anderson here at the South Central Library System. I'm taking over a little bit for Jamie this morning, having some network issues throughout the state. So I just wanted to tell you that it's Jean here this morning. And welcome to the second annual Wild Wisconsin Winter Web Conference. I didn't do a little introduction with GoToWebinar, but if you have questions, we'll take those, I believe, at the end, Christian.
Absolutely.
Okay. So this morning's first program is Cloud Computing Beyond the Hype, a Vehicle for Information. And we have Christian, who is the Chief Technologist on the Cloud Strategy Team for Hewlett-Packard, and he is joining us live from Brussels. So without further ado, I'm going to change it over to Christian.
Okay.
So you should have a little thing that says, got it?
Make another attendee a presenter, drawing tools, GIF control, yep. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, well,
yes.
Thank you. So this is all about technology, and technology is absolutely great. So let me put these things a little bit aside so that you can actually see the full screen. Well, welcome to all of you. Good morning. And isn't there any better time to do a internet-based presentation than a time when there are internet issues in a particular state? So welcome to the internet and the world of the internet. What I want to do with you today is really walk you through what is changing in our day-to-day life. And then I want to do a little bit of a reflection. And by the way, I'm not a librarian myself, so I have no clue about what your guys' job is. But I sort of started thinking a little bit about, as a user of libraries, how could some of the things that we're talking about from a technology perspective actually change the way I would use and I would read my books. I happen to be a heavy traveler, and so I'll give you some ideas. You do with it whatever you want. If you feel that I'm completely crazy, that's perfectly fine, so don't worry about that. But I just want to give you some thinkings, because you know what's actually interesting is the world is changing, and the world is increasingly becoming digital, mobile, virtual, and personal. These are four words that were actually originally said by an old HP CEO back in around 2000, 2001, and have been extensively used by Carly Fiorina, actually, and have been extensively used by Thomas Friedman in his book, The World is Flat, which is probably in your libraries, at least I hope so. But it really shows what is actually happening. Unfortunately, we can't do hands up, but I'm pretty sure you all have a smartphone. Many of you probably have an iPhone. You're using those. You're tweeting. You're Facebooking. You do all sorts of these different things. And you do them regularly. You do them in your private life. What we see is that private life is actually way further down the road on information technology than what businesses are today. We're calling that the consumerization of IT. And what we, in every one of our businesses in which we are, have to think about is, how do I change the way I do my business so that I evolve with what my customers want, so that I evolve with the way that the world is actually going. Because to quote back one of our founders, Dave Packard, to remain static is to lose ground. It's like standing at the railway station and seeing the train passing. We need to jump on the train and move with the train. But the problem is, what should we be doing? Well, before giving you some hints and helping you to think about through this, let me just give you in the next 10 minutes or so a history of the evolution of IT and the internet. So let's start, okay? Fasten your seatbelts. The internet actually started in the 60s. It started in the 60s with a project from the US government, in particularly from the defense, which was called DARPA, to basically link 4 universities that were doing research for the defense together so that they could ease up making their research. And by the way, once those 4 were linked together. One day somebody dropped a text message on somebody else's computer, and that was the first email that was actually sent. It was pretty rudimentary. It was all about connectivity. It was actually all about ubiquitous, uniform access to devices. And information was floating from one device to another, and in between those devices were pipes, and through those pipes, through standardized protocols, information was passing forth and back. That was the first phase of the internet. Then things evolved. And in particularly in and around CERN, somebody created a concept which was called the World Wide Web. Because a number of those different clusters had actually been created, and there were a number of nets, internets, that were actually hanging around. And that guy said, well, maybe what we need to do is we need to tie those together. And one of the things that he created was this famous WWW, and it doesn't stand for, what is it, the Wisconsin Web Conference, Winter Conference? No, it stands for the World Wide Web in this particular case. And the idea is to actually tie things together and allow people to get not just access to each other's devices, but actually this time to get access to information. That led to e-commerce, that led to databases where you can actually, where we could actually get information. In parallel with that, we invented the whole concept of hyperlinks, and so on and so on and so on. We're now in the 90s. That was phase 2. And then in the early 2000s, our friends from Amazon, which you may not like, but our friends from Amazon started to realize that because they did a lot of their sales towards the December timeframe, most of the year they had a fair amount of computers available they didn't know what to do about. So they decided they were going to go and rent those computers. And by that, they actually created a whole market, which is the market of the cloud. The cloud that actually started by the creation of, or the use by others of, and sorry for that, the use by others of infrastructure, but then quickly evolved through something that is called software as a service, to basically the capability of calling upon services and accessing those services from somewhere in the cloud. And now why is it called a cloud? Well, because through those first couple steps in that journey, that network became so complex that people couldn't draw the whole network anymore. And to represent the network, what they actually did is they drew a little cloud. That's why the cloud is called the cloud. Believe me or not, it's that simple. So we're calling the clouds, and in the process of moving from the web to the cloud, we've actually created a whole number of new roles. We have people that are service providers. They create some services and actually allow you to access those services. And by the way, probably without knowing it, you access some of those services every day of your life. Every time you click on one of those little icons on your mobile phone, very often you actually react and interrelate back to something at the back end, and that something at the back end is actually a service that is going to deliver you information. This may be the weather conditions, this may be whether your plane is on time, this may be the latest stock price at Wall Street, this may be all sorts of things. But it basically, let's, oh gosh, what happens here? That's what we're actually talking about. Okay. Now these guys, but there's other people, and some of them are brokers. So what they basically do is they give you access to services coming from many other vendors, other service providers. They may be traders, they may be aggregators. So there's a number of different roles that are actually creating, and this is slowly but surely becoming a very new industry that we are actually dealing with. But what this implies for IT is that where IT has very much been bothering about the infrastructures and the computers and the servers that they're dealing with, slowly but surely, because that is actually moving to the cloud, their job becomes really a job of offering a service to the user. Offering a service to the user that is agile and responsive because you don't want to wait anymore. You're tired of doing that because in your private life, on your mobile phone, you have direct answers. So why don't you have direct answers in the business? And also looking at user experience. How easy is it for the user to actually experience and to interact with the environment and with the system? Now, where are we going? Well, there is a new term that is actually popping up, and that new term is called the Internet of Things. Some of you may know something called the Nike Fuel Band, and I'll talk more about that later. It's a device that actually gathers your movements, what you do during the day, the amount of calories you're actually taking. That's just one example of a whole bunch of capabilities to access information or to get information automatically on all sorts of things. So that ultimately it's no longer just going to be about services, but it's going to be about sensations. How do you sense the world around you? It's basically becoming ubiquitous and uniform access to the real world. What is this world? How is the world acting? What is actually happening? And being it for healthcare purposes, where you continuously monitor it because you have a little patch, whether it is weather conditions, whether it is traffic that information as and when you really move forward. So let me continue. Sensors that are basically at the basis of this, they're being positioned everywhere. You can get sensors all over the place, being it tracking wildlife, being it understanding infrastructure health, being it looking at home automation, all sorts of things. That's fundamentally where we're actually going. Now that was in how much? 10 minutes? The history of the Internet and the evolution of the Internet. Now, that's very nice, very interesting, but very far from your day-to-day requirements and from what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. So let me come back and now move to where we are. What are we doing and how are we actually doing things? Okay? What and where are we at the moment? The first thing you have to realize is that everything is becoming digital. And that's something that has to dawn down to you. And I'll give you a couple examples. Do you realize that 97% of money is nothing else than bits and bytes on computers? Doesn't have any physical substance. Nothing. When you earn shares in a company, it's a couple bits that are set up against your account. That's as far as it goes. I don't need to tell you that our books are becoming digital. I don't need to tell you that our music is becoming digital. Our photos are becoming digital. Our music is becoming, our films are becoming digital. Even artwork is increasingly developed digitally. In the old days, we used to make cartoon films by drawing 25 pictures per second. Now all of that happens digitally on computers. Even many of our interactions, and what we do this morning is a very good example of it, many of our interactions are actually digitally. So our life is evolving, and digital is increasingly becoming part of our life. Our TV, by the way, is becoming digital. Some of our radios have become digital, and I could go on like that. But it's all about being connected to that digital world when the internet actually wants it, but that's okay. Being connected through those smartphones, being connected through tablets, through book e-readers, through things like the Nike Fuel Band I talked about earlier, that basically monitor every activity that I do during the day, knows how long I'm sleeping at night, knows how well I'm sleeping, knows what I do, when I eat, when I do a number of things. What Nike does with that is it gathers that information, and he can actually start analyzing that information. You guess the power of what they actually starting to get from that to start doing and marketing you a whole bunch of other stuff. So that digital world actually gives us a heck of a new set of new opportunities that we really want to take and keep in mind. But how can we think through those new opportunities and what we could do to go on the train and not stand in the station like I mentioned earlier? What I'm doing with that is I'm thinking about two particular ways that you may want to start thinking about. On the one hand, the whole aspects of communities. Can I build communities around a particular subject? And if we take libraries here, could I build a library community that discusses books, that gives suggestions, that makes advice, that recommends things, that does things? People that have common set of interest actually getting together and doing something around it. The second thing is starting to think about the digital experience ecosystem. When you're dealing with a physical library, you're dealing with a place, you're dealing with a set of books that are in that particular place, you're dealing with something which is very physical. From the moment on you're getting digital, all the physical location limitations have a tendency to disappear. And so you may want to start thinking about, what is my ecosystem? What are the partners that I can actually deal with, that I can integrate in my network to deliver the best service, the best digital experience to my end users and to my customers? One thing that I researched was about ebooks. I've been, and I have to be very honest here, I've used ebooks and I've read through ebooks. I personally still like very much a paper book in my hands. That's probably because I'm a bit older, but you know, there's nothing so nice as actually handling a book. But some people, and I'm traveling a lot like I mentioned, and I see a lot of people going to ebooks. Well, the growth in the sales of ebooks has actually reduced and limited very lately. I think there's a number of reasons for that, and I found this as in an article that that you have there, and in the article said we may be discovering that ebooks are well suited for some types of books, like fiction, but not well suited for other types, non-fiction, literary fiction, and so on and so on and so on, and are well suited to certain reading situations, for example, a plane trip, but less to others lying on the couch. So the ebook may turn out to be more of a complement to the printed book, as audiobooks have long been, rather than an outright substitute. Interesting. But at the same time giving you some opportunities. opportunities to start thinking through things, opportunities to put two and two together. Let's think about, and we talked about this evolution already, let's think about how we can please and address the needs, the varying needs of our users and our customers, our readers, I should say, in this digital world, combining what we have with what we can do with technology today. One piece of information that you may actually want to keep in mind is that by the year 2000, the world will have generated about 35 zettabytes worth of data. Now, a zettabyte, 1 zettabyte, if I burn it in CDs and I stack up the CDs, 1 zettabyte get me halfway through Mars. So you sort of realize the quantity of information we're actually talking about here. It's very interesting to look at the amount of information that is becoming available. Now, not all of that information is relevant. Okay, I read somewhere that every second, 3.5 hours worth of video is uploaded in YouTube. I bet most of that 3.5 hours video is not worth looking at. But that's okay. It's there. What I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to sift through the whole of that information to find the thing, or to the whole of that data to find the information that is actually relevant to me. It's a tremendous opportunity to reinvent business, to reinvent social interaction. And if there's one thing that I want you to take away from my presentation this morning, it's probably that. How actually am I capable of doing that? How am I capable of really evolving and moving forward with some of these things? So it's combining 4 things that really allows me to change my whole thinking and my whole approach. Cloud and mobility are 2 platforms that I may want to use. Cloud as my backend, where I will have a set of my information, where I will be able to run a whole bunch of the functionalities that I actually want to run, and mobile as the way for me to connect with my users, with my customers, with my readers, with whoever makes sense. And then I'll use data sources to give them the digital information that they actually may be interested in. And I'll use the social environment, and when I speak about a social environment, the social environment for me to really be able to interact with my end users. It's combining those that allows me to create new services, that allows me to approach people differently, build new relationships, build new business models, do new things. And the only barrier that we have in that is our creativity. Cloud computer means I don't need to care about the data centers anymore, because I'm just going to go and use whatever is available. I get this impression that I have infinite capacity in what I'm doing. And by the way, don't worry, I'm only paying for what I use. So if I don't use anything, I don't pay. So it's not something where I need to put a lot of money on the table before I actually start. So it's a place where it's worth actually doing some experimentation. But things are going faster and faster and faster. Again, I love, and you probably realize that by now, I love going back to history. And what this chart shows is how things have changed over times. You know, I joined HP a long time ago, about 35 years ago. And when I joined HP, we had an email system that was absolutely second to none. In 3 days, I could get a response from my colleagues in the Bay Area. 3 days was unheard of. Customers were bloody impressed. If today I don't have an answer to my email in 10 minutes, I'm getting nervous. Time has been shrinking. And that's applicable to any of the examples I'm actually giving here. So our people want things here and now. It's another one of those elements to keep in mind when we're actually talking about user experience. We increasingly start talking about, and you know the IT industry is very good in creating new terms. But one of those terms that is really starting to become important for businesses in particular is the concept of the prosumer. On the one end, it's a consumer. It's somebody who is connected, who has a smartphone, who has a tablet, who has all of these gadgets, and wants to be available anytime to actually do things. On the other hand, that person needs to be using ideally the same devices, needs to be able to have access to its business information as well as its personal information. And that's a headache for a lot of businesses. But it equips that prosumer with quite advanced platforms that you can build upon to deliver them specific services. And let me get you or give you a way you could start thinking about doing new things. And I really see 4 areas where you could do new things and that you may want to think through. And I'll give you a couple examples on some of those. You can do new business innovation, new business processes, new business models, new efficiencies. You know, really the way I run my business. I can do new product and service innovations. What I deliver, and increasingly what I deliver is an interaction of a product with potential services. Could I, for example, even if I lent out a physical book, could that physical book be tied to a website giving a lot of additional information around what is actually happening in the book, to just take an example? And by the way, some writers actually do that sort of things. I may want to build some new ecosystem innovation, which means not just looking at me and my little environment, but who are the others that I can actually tie myself to so that we jointly can create something new and a new experience to our end users. I can change the way I do IT, and all of that uses underlying technology innovations. And cloud, mobile, social, big data are all of those new technologies that are actually becoming available, and that sustain some of those. So before giving you some of my thoughts about librarians and libraries in particular, let me first give you a couple examples. One example I actually love is about 3 years ago we got contacted by a gentleman you may have heard of, which is called Paul McCartney. And Paul McCartney had about 1 million things in his basement from the Beatles. All sorts of things. You know, the little post-it that he used during the last concert that they did at the Beatles, so that he had all the songs in the orders in which he wanted to play, and all sorts of things like that. And he came to us and he said, could you guys digitize all of this because I want to make this available to my fan base. And we did that with him. And today, www.paulmccartney.com is a very popular website in which you can get access to a heck of a lot of information, films, photos, music, documents, music sheets, all sorts of things around what Paul McCartney has done, first with the Beatles, then with the Wings, and then on his own. It's an example. He sort of at one moment in time said, hey, I have all of these artifacts. I can only give it to a small amount of people that actually come and see me, and I actually dig it out and give it to them. Why don't I make that available to the world? That's what he wanted to do, and that's how he's done it. One example. Fiat a couple of years ago decided, Fiat Brazil, South America, decided they wanted to create a car for the South American market. And rather than going into one of those traditional concept car designs where you get a couple of designers sort of thinking the best and knowing what they do, they decided to do something completely different. They opened up a website and they said to people, hey guys, are you willing to help us design tomorrow's car for Brazil? And more than 18,000 people signed up. Or 17,000, sorry, I was 1,000 wrong, 17,000. And they created a car that didn't look anything like what they had expected. They had thought about this being a large macho car, you know, the South Americans, and it turned out to be a very small car to easily be able to drive into the horrendous traffic all over the place. The concept car was actually manufactured, was actually shown, but they decided not to manufacture it in series, and they got a lot of complaints from all of those people because they wanted to buy the car. So what was interesting is not only did they get a heck of a lot of very, very interesting inputs from actual users, at the same time they had cultivated a group of people that wanted to buy their products. Interesting, isn't it? Again, using technology, being creative and tying things together, do something brand new. Let me give you another example. This is an American company which is called Quirky. The guy who created Quirky is an inventor. And he created a bunch of Apple iPhone gadgets. And he managed to get patents on them, and then he managed to sell them. And he made money on that. And now one day he sort of reached, he needed to go and do the next one. And this time he got an illumination, and he said, well, rather than creating another gadget, why don't I create a company helping innovators bring their products to market? So how does it work? It works using crowdsourcing. Basically what it does is, if you have an invention, you know, you've invented something and you want to get it to market, or you have an ID and you want to get that ID to market, you actually register, you describe your ID, and the whole community says whether this is a good or bad ID, and if it's a good ID, it's sort of going to bubble up towards the top of the series. And every week they take one or two of those IDs, the top one or two IDs of that at that moment, and they actually implement them. So they work with the guy or the lady who actually came up with the ID. They work with them. They have their engineers working on that. They have people actually looking at the manufacturing side of things. They're filing the patents. They're doing all sorts of other stuff around it, and they make the product available. And over the they've been now in business 3-4 years, so they've built a channel where the product is actually being resold. Very interesting, very simple process, interesting process, extremely successful company. Again, a company that uses technology to build onto the people and create something that couldn't be done otherwise. Using technology to do some new things. And now let me finish off with the last example. There's a little story behind this. One day, remember, I'm living in Brussels. One day I was on the train up to Amsterdam, and I was reading some material on Clout. And I have this young guy sitting near to me who sort of looks over my shoulder and says, "Oh, you're reading on Clout?" I say, "Yeah." He says, "I'm also working on Clout." "Oh, interesting." He said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Well, I'm actually a developer in a GPS manufacturing company." I said, "Okay, GPS, Clout, where does that fit together?" What he says, he says, "We're extremely successful." I say, "Yeah, I noticed that." He says, "But that's a problem." "What do you mean that's a problem?" I said, "Well, that's a problem because, when you're on the motorway and there is a traffic jam in front of you, your GPS is warned about that traffic jam and calculates an alternate route." "Yes." "Well, all of our GPSs are equipped with the same algorithm. So they calculate the same alternate route, which means that very often, because we have many GPSs, we end up with an alternate route traffic jam initiated by the GPS, because the GPS is sending too many cars on that alternate route. So our customers haven't gained anything anymore. So now we're starting to look at mobile enabling our GPSs and actually having some algorithms in the cloud that can distribute the cars across multiple alternate routes to avoid traffic jams on those alternate routes. Again, using different technologies to really help smoothen out the traffic in this particular case. So what you've seen is I've given you multiple examples in very different places, showing that how with creativity you can really get down and do a number of things. But let me now sort of dream for a minute, okay? And I hope you allow me to do that. The first question is, what do I have? Well, on the one hand, I have readers. And those readers often read, but they also want to discuss. They may want some advice. They may want to rate books. They may want to suggest books to some of their friends. And at the other end, I have the standard books, the classical books, the paper books. But then I have some books that have been scanned in, and there's many sources. Some of them are for free. Others are to be paid for. I increasingly get writers that actually immediately create digital manuscripts, so books that don't exist on paper, but that are easy, particularly people that do self-publishing, that are easily published in digital format. And then, last but not least, there's a heck of a lot of public archives that actually have some quite pointed, but quite good information that is slowly but surely also being digitized and that people may want to have access to. So how can I tie the two of those together? What can I, as a librarian, play a role in the whole of this? Can I intervene and sit in the middle of this all? Well, think about this. On the one hand, I'm going to need my sources for my digital information. Obviously, the paper sits in my library. I know about that. But the digital pieces, I may have them, or I may have some of them sitting on hard disks in my own environment. I may tie myself with a bunch of other libraries around the United States, or around the States, around the United States, around the globe, that I may also want to give, because the advantage of the digital format is that it becomes, location becomes independent. I may have access to particular archive I was seeing that, what was it, Georgia, if I remember right, has a whole project about digitizing their archives, and some of that piece of information may be interesting. And I might want to give that to my users. I still believe that many users will be interested in getting some advice. So you as a librarian, it's not because it's now digital information that goes across that you don't have a role anymore. You still have that same role of advising, whether it's digital or physical doesn't really make a difference. Only the way you advise may now become different. It may become over chat, it may become over telephone, it may become over all sorts of different means. We need to think about it. And the user may also want to have access to a community of other users that they respect, with whom they want to discuss about the books, with whom they want to do a number of things. Can we put that in place? Yes, we can. Be aware that 90% of the information, you remember those 35 zettabytes I talked about? 90% of that information is unstructured or semi-structured. And structured information is really easily to analyze. Unstructured and semi-structured information, it's much more difficult to analyze. Fortunately today, there exists a number of technologies allowing you to do that. So for example, at any moment in time, I can analyze using Twitter feeds what the sentiment is of the world regarding a particular subject, a particular keyword, eventually my company or something else. So that is feasible today. That is feasible today by starting to tie, and by tying and analyzing a whole bunch of different formats of information, and here are a number of examples where you can actually do this, and this is just a standard slide that I used, nothing specific to libraries in this one, but you'll understand where I'm going with this in a minute. Hello? Yeah, I'm still there. Okay, and really starting to look at how things are actually happening and how things are moving. I'm gonna, just give me 1 minute. I realize that my headset is actually getting out of power. So what I'm going to change to a different way, and I hope you still hear me. Yes, you do. Okay, and so we get that problem sorted out. I apologize for that, but I didn't realize it was getting out of the battery is actually gone. So that being said, I can collect a whole bunch of information around any subject, and that subject may be a book or maybe anything else, and then understand how and extract from there a set of information that may actually want to be interesting for me. So let me give, how would this work? Well, I told you I'm a traveler. So I've had a long, tiring day traveling, meeting with customers. You know, I'm tired. Finally reached the hotel. I'm alone. I feel lonely. I feel depressed. The only thing I want is a good beer and an easy book to read. What if I get online and say, hey, my beloved library, this is how I feel. You suggest me something to read? That sort of goes well with my with my thinking. We may have used the technique I just talked about to analyze books and sort of label books using something which is called metadata, label books according to those different moods, and out of that come back to me and say, hey, you know, I have those 3 books to suggest. Which one do you want? And a short description of each plot. And I say, hey, I want book number 2, download it, and I'm start reading, go and get the beer, and I'm going. You can do that. The technology exists today. It can allow you to give a different type of a service to your readers, to your customers, and actually allowing them to interact with you wherever they are in the world. Jamie, when we prepared for this presentation today, asked me a question, which was, why do librarians have cats? Now, not being a librarian is difficult for me to answer. But I want to tell you that the cat is safe. Don't worry. Because I very much believe that not all books lend themselves to digital format. Art books is a good example. But there's many others. So what you have to think is not, how do I replace what I do today? But it's much more about, how do I complement what I do today to do something new, to really be able to how would I say, to really be able to give a better service and a more complete service to my users and my readers. And your cat will be safe and he'll still be there. Don't worry about that. So let me conclude. Opportunities are endless. And I hope that I've given you a little glimpse of what could be feasible. Now again, and I apologize, I'm not a librarian myself, so probably some of the ideas that I shared with you are fully ludicrous. Maybe. But what I want you to get out of this is really saying, hey, let me think differently. Let me think at how I could address my readers, address my users, address the people that are meeting me, and give them more service, allow them easier access to what we actually have. And by doing so, giving them the opportunity to get a better experience with us. The technology is there, but it's up to us to turn it into something that makes sense. And don't worry, IT is entering in everything that we do. And the mobile phone that you have down there at your right hand is a good example of that. But it's all about really thinking on how to evolve and what to do about it. Let me, and in that process, really go for what I call lateral thinking. Don't think straight and don't think, oh, this can't be done. And I'll give you an example of what I mean by lateral thinking. I love cartoonists because cartoonists are capable of tying in one place a whole bunch of things that have nothing to do with each other. And that is what this lateral thinking is all about. So unfortunately, you all know that on October the 5th, 2011 in Cupertino, Steve Jobs passed away, unfortunately. Some of you may also know that somewhere in the Sinai, around, and not everybody agrees with the exact dates, but around 1513 before Christ, Moses received stone tablets. And my source there is the Exodus. Now you're probably saying in your seat, what the heck is this guy talking about? Have those two elements, Steve Jobs and Moses, anything to do with each other? Well, frankly, to me, they hadn't, till I saw this cartoon. Moses meets Steve. He's going to upgrade your tablets. That's what I mean by lateral thinking. Having this opportunity to start putting things together that originally don't belong with each other, to create something new that can in this case be a cartoon, but that can as well be a complete new business model, that can as well be something completely different. And that's what I tease you with, is that capability of rethinking your business, rethinking your industry and your service to your community, and seeing how, using what's available today, jumping on the train, you can actually get there. I hope I teased you a little bit here. I want to thank you for having listened to me all along. I also want to thank Jamie and Jane for pulling all of this together. And frankly, I'm open to questions if we still have a bit of time.
Hi, Christian. This is Jamie.
Hi, Jamie.
Hi, I'm online now. Glad you were with us.
And I saw you like the cat.
I did like the cat comment. Thank you so much. So as Jean mentioned, we had some pretty statewide issues this morning with connecting, but now we're all up and running. So that is good. Someone had a question. You had on one of your slides LOB management.
Yes,
could you explain what that is?
Yeah, and I apologize. I should have taken out those TLAs, those three-letter algorithms, three-letter acronyms.
We love acronyms too.
Yeah. LOB stands for line of business, and typically because we in the IT industry, we speak about the line of business people and the IT people. That's what we mean. The line of business people, frankly, are the real guys and the real ladies, the ones that really do the business. And the IT people are the ones that actually keep running those computers.
Okay.
Okay.
Could you explain a little bit, since you're living in Brussels, or what the state is of public libraries there, or what they're like, or types of issues they're facing, or a lot of us probably aren't aware of those things, and I thought since we have you, that might be interesting to hear about from your perspective.
Yeah, I think libraries in Belgium at least, and I think is the case in most of Europe, are often very much subsidized by governments, local, state, or local or state governments. And as times have become tougher and as budgets need to reduce, so have subsidies also reduced. And that gives a couple challenges. One challenge is, well, books still cost money, and so how can I continue increasing and renewing the books that I actually have in an environment where I get less money to be able to do a lot of these things. So that's really definitely one of the issues. The other issue is getting the younger population, the population what we call the Y generation. That generation that is very much connected online and others, getting those people coming to the library to pick up a book. They do it because they need to do it for school, but after that they don't really like to do it. So one of the things that they also that they're also starting to look into is, how do I approach this new generation of people that actually looks at contents, looks at information, looks at things in a completely different manner. Because the literature is still important and is important for our culture. And so we need to be able to actually get the literature to that generation too, but we can't do it in the traditional approaches that we've actually been taking. And that is one of the challenges that many many libraries actually have.
Where do you see public libraries in 10 years?
I think they will. I very much see them going into a digital world too, complementing what they have and the collections they actually have with very much a set of digital platforms through which they actually share books and content with their user base. In doing so, there's a couple things that are going to change. First of all, libraries will not be on their own anymore. I would expect them to start integrating their digital collections, at least, across geographies, so that they can offer wider choices to people. That first part is something I strongly believe into. And so it will be a combination of both digital and paper books, and digital and paper information that will actually be shared and be transferred. So from that perspective, I really see that as an expansion of what they're actually doing today. And I think there's a lot of people that are looking for that, and they shouldn't wait too long, because otherwise somebody like Amazon will actually pick that up and pick that market up and sort of try to wipe you out, and that's not a good thing.
Excellent. Well, we're almost out of time, but I just wanted to also ask you, I know you've never been to Wisconsin, but where have you been in the U.S.?
Oh, I've been to many places in the U.S. I've been quite often on the West Coast, obviously, because that's where our headquarters are. Sure. But I've been in Texas, I've been in Chicago, I've been in the Boston area, in the Washington area, in New York area. I've even been, to believe me or not, to St. Louis once or twice. I've been to New Orleans a couple of times too. I think that's about it.
Well, we thank you so much for, and what time is it there? Is it about 5 o'clock?
It's getting up to 5 o'clock, yes, in a couple of minutes.
Okay, so I just want to we want to thank you so much for joining us live and providing some great food for thought as the first speaker of this conference. And thank all of you for listening in today. I hope you join us for our next session that's coming up at 10:30. And we will be live at that point. So thank you for listening in.
Thank you, and have all a great day and an excellent conference.